Professor Lydia Brito to come and give us the remarks for International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists.
Honorable Senator Monica Muchangwa, Minister of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services. Honorable Minister, it's always a pleasure to welcome you to one of UNESCO events, and this, as you can see, is a regional event, and your presence is the sign of the commitment of the government of Zimbabwe, really in protecting the journalists, in fighting against impunity, and also supporting our continent to do so in the continuous way. Honorable Nick Mangwana, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services. Again, dear Nick, you have been our partner, one of the persons, Minister, that you are in your ministry and your team. It's working hand to hand with our regional office for Southern Africa. I also want to recognize MISA through the spokesperson, Mr. Father Barnabe Simatende. MISA is an incredible partner of UNESCO. Most of the monitoring, the publications, the trainings, the conferences, the debates, the reflections that we do, not only in Southern Africa, but also together with other regions of the African continent. MISA, it's our partner, is the ones really working hand to hand with us. I also want to recognize the presence of Professor Ruby Mashwenge, the chairperson of Zimbabwe Media Commission. Professor Ruby, you have been also again one of the partners of UNESCO, and not only for Zimbabwe work, but really for the Southern African region, and showing how independent media commissions can indeed guarantee the environment that we need to have freedom of expression and safety of journalists. I also want to recognize Madam Margaret Shirapa, the Secretary General of the National Commission of UNESCO in Zimbabwe. Madam Shirapa, again, very much part of what we do and always coming with us and accompanying us. And also as a good Secretary General, telling us what we are not doing or what you are not doing as well, so we can rethink our actions. So Margaret, again, thank you so much for being with us in this beautiful town of Vic Falls. I want also to recognize the two representatives of the City Development Cooperation Agency from Sweden. They travel from very far. They have been with us in Harare together with other colleagues from SIDA, but they were able to come to Vic Falls and to this conference because we thought this is a reflection of what you are supporting throughout the years. So thank you for being here, and thank you for the general support of the Swedish people and the Swedish government. I want also to recognize the Embassy of Sweden through Wonder, that again, we work also closely with several embassies, and in that respect also, through the Embassy of Sweden, I want to thank also all the partners that have been supporting UNESCO in these specific areas, but in many other areas of development. Of course, we are in a media-related conference, and I was so proud, Honorable Minister, you saw the amount of female journalists we have here present. So really proud of our African continent, where we are seeing the empowerment of female journalists. Nothing against the male journalists, Simatende, but it's good to see that we have very powerful female journalists here present. Also because part of the plan is related to violence against female journalists that are a very vulnerable group in the overall group of journalists. Therefore, I want to recognize all the African media and stakeholders that are really present here. We saw that we have, of course, representatives from MISA, but we have AFEX, we have SANIF, TAIF, FAGE, EMS, Article 19, national and regional media associations, CSD in Southern African region, and of course, together with the media partners, we also have several government representatives and also from the African Union and from some of our economic regional committees. I want also really to thank all of you for being here in these beautiful places. Was mentioned by our Master of Ceremony. Vic Falls is also a World Heritage Site of UNESCO, a joint one with Zambia, so it's also a representation of how solidarity, collaboration among two countries really can preserve this beautiful, beautiful site, this beautiful World Heritage Site of UNESCO. And I really encourage the participants to take a little bit of time, and I hope the organizers will allow for that, that you can really visit the National Park of Victoria Falls and really see not only what nature can do, but what our ancestors and our communities, local communities, are doing to preserve this site, not only for Zimbabwe and Zambia, not only for Southern Africa, but really for the world. So thank you very much for coming here and for being with us this yesterday and the next 2 days. Honorable Minister, allow me to start by reading the message of my Director General, Madame Audrey Azoulay, on the occasion of the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. And after that message that I will read now, I will just put forward a few points that I think are important for this conference. Allow me to start reading my Director General message. This year, we mark the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Plan of Action on the Safety of Journalists and the Issue of Impunity. This groundbreaking document was adopted to acknowledge the vital work journalists do. For example, when they report on conflicts and crises, or when they inquire into the workings of power and investigate corruption and other forms of injustice, as well as the risks they face on doing so. Indeed, the safety of journalists, their freedom of expression, and the free flow of information are pillars of democratic life and a prerequisite to all human rights. This is why, in 2012, the international community endorsed this plan of action to protect journalists, prevent crimes against them, and pursue their perpetrators. To achieve these goals, we must work collectively, and much progress has been made by member states, United Nations agencies, international organizations, judicial actors, and civil society to implement concrete measures nationally, regionally, and globally. Here at UNESCO, we have developed guidelines and toolkits and trained over 24,000 judicial actors and 11,500 law enforcement and security officials on issues related to freedom of expression and the security of journalists, including in the digital world. Despite these efforts, journalists continue to be killed at an alarming rate. According to our observatory, 955 journalists have lost their lives since 2012. 71 have been killed since January, making 2022 already the deadliest year since 2018. Just as shockingly, although we have seen a slight improvement over the past 10 years, almost 9 in 10 journalists' killings, they are remaining unresolved. Therefore, on this anniversary, we must renew our commitment to protecting journalists everywhere, at all times. This means in situations of conflict and crisis, of course, and UNESCO is supporting journalists in Ukraine and Afghanistan, for example. It also means in times of peace, for that is when most journalists have been killed in recent years. Lastly, we must step up our efforts online, where new forms of violence have emerged, especially towards women. 3 in 4 women journalists have experienced online harassment according to UNESCO data. The international conference that took place in Vienna on the 3rd and 4th of November to celebrate this 10th anniversary was an opportunity to take our collective action further, to strengthen cooperation and synergies, to replicate good practices, to improve monitoring and information sharing, to build the capacities of all actors so we can better tackle the challenge. Because when it comes to protecting journalists, everyone has a part to play. If we are complacent, if we look away, we are part of the problem. So on this International Day to end impunity for crimes against journalists, let us all stand up for journalists, our speakers of truth. Let us fight for justice and protect the free flow of information that is so vital to our societies. End of message of Director General Audrey Azoulay. Excellency Minister Muchangwa, distinguished participants, UNESCO, in collaboration with media stakeholders, coordinated sub-regional consultations in Africa to assess the achievements and the challenges in the implementation of the United Nations Plan of Action, so as to forge a new way forward for this plan of action beyond the first decade of its implementation. The feedback from such regional consultations were compiled for inputs for the ministerial high-level conference, which was held in Vienna the 3 and 4 of November, on the occasion with the International Day to End Impunity of Crimes Against Journalists. The high-level ministerial conference was convened by the Austrian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in collaboration with UNESCO and the Office of the High Commission for Human Rights. The 2 days in Victoria Falls will be spending renewing the recommendations from the sub-regional consultations from all the regions in Africa, as well as review the outcomes and recommendations from the Vienna Ministerial High-Level Conference. The 2 days consultations will lead to a roadmap for African media stakeholders on the implementation of the UN Plan of Action on Safety of Journalists and the issue of impunity. This plan of action is a result of a multi-stakeholder approach. Since the outset of the process of constituting this UN Plan of Action, we have been taking a multi-sectoral approach because it's important that all the stakeholders that have something to contribute to the safety of journalists, to the fight against impunity, be part of this joint action. And now we need, of course, to have even more that multi-stakeholder approach because of many of the new multifaceted challenges that we are having now and that media is facing now, in particular in relation to media convention and the rise of digital communications. So what is coming out of this conference will be adapted to the new challenges and the new contexts that media are facing around the world, but in particular in the African continent. We are really stressing that this plan of action has as main objective to create a free and safe environment for journalists and media workers in both conflict and no-conflict situations, with a view to strengthen peace, democracy, and development, regional and worldwide. The UNPA supports the establishment of a coordinated interagency mechanism within the United Nations to handle issues related to the safety of journalists, supports countries to develop legislation and mechanisms that are favorable to freedom of expression and information, and advocate for countries to implement existing international laws, best practices, and principles in supporting the safety of journalists and media workers. This plan of action is not only for the United Nations, it is, however, a plan which brings the UN system together to engage all other media stakeholders in promoting the safety of journalists and addressing the issue of impunity. And as Simatende mentioned already, this plan has four important pillars, the 4 Ps. And clearly the first one is prevention. So we need to take various measures and action points to make sure that we avert threats to safety of journalists. So you will see that in the proposed plan of action, there are proposed action points on prevention, as it will be also on protection, that really involves actions such as effective law enforcement, effective protection mechanisms with specific regards to the dangers faced by female journalists, condemnation of all violence, existence of early warning systems, and also rapid response mechanisms such as hotlines and online platforms, mobile phones, safe havens for journalists and media workers under threat. The third pillar on persecution, as you may be aware, the global impunity rate still stands at 86%. Only 14% of the cases of killed journalists in line of duty are resolved. This is a very important pillar. Examples of UNESCO work in this pillar are training of judges, prosecutors, and the law enforcement bodies on their obligation under the international human rights and humanitarian law, and also supports the establishment of specialized police investigation units. The fourth pillar, not less important, is partnership building in addressing safety of journalists and the issue of impunity. The UN Plan of Action also envisages cooperation and practical actions with all relevant stakeholders in 6 specific areas. So we have 4 pillars and 6 specific areas. The first one is clearly awareness raising, sensitizing the public as well as the key stakeholders and partners on the societal importance of independent and professional journalism. In this particular area, UNESCO supports international commemorations. We have the Guillermo Cano Prize, the World Press Freedom Prize, as well as the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. All these actions and commemorations serve to promote and to bring to society the importance of safety of journalists, and also making clear that if we don't look at the issue of impunity seriously, our free press, our independent press will always be threatened. The second area is standard setting and policy making. For example, in Europe, they have the Article 10 of European Convention on Human Rights, ratified by all Council of Europe member states. Several UN resolutions have also been established to condemn all attacks against media workers, as well as to inspire the establishment of national, regional, and global mechanisms to protect the right of freedom of expression and guarantee the safety of journalists. Monitoring and report is another important area of the UN Plan of Action, and really it involves research and collection of data on the state of press freedom and the safety of journalists at national, regional, continental, and global level. Various reports are produced because of the monitoring activities. For example, at global level, we have the UNESCO Director General report on the safety of journalists and the danger of impunity. We have also the World Trend Report and the UNESCO Observatory of Killed Journalists. In our region, we have now the state of press freedom in Southern Africa. And at the continental level, we just have starting a digital platform on the safety of journalists in Africa. And as from this year, we have also the African-wide State of Press Freedom Report, which are launching here in Victoria Falls. UNESCO has developed the Journalist Safety Indicators Assessment Framework, which can be used to assess member states on the status of safety of journalists. The assessment is another example of monitoring and reporting of the UN Plan of Action. UNESCO supports stakeholders in contributing to the Universal Periodic Review, and this review is also part of the monitoring and reporting of the UNPA. For instance, in our region, we have had Eswatini and Zimbabwe going through the UPR in the last year, followed by Zambia and Botswana in 2023. The fourth area is capacity building, and in the message of our Director General, she has mentioned a lot of the work that we do in capacity of local actors, including journalists, security force, and the judiciary, but we also try to bring regionally the capacity to act at regional and global level. Research is really an important area of the UNPA because we need to better understand what is in stake and measure the impact of our actions, and also making possible changes as we need to have a better impact. The last area is really coalition building, and I think part of this conference, it's why we are here all together, is really to ensure a joint action and a common vision how to fight the impunity and how to ensure safety of journalists. Really, it's a great pleasure to be here. And I have also to, before I close, Honorable Minister, I want to recognize the presence of the 4 managers of the new community radios in Zimbabwe. Please, a round of applause to these new media partners. And really, I'm so proud that you are also joining us here with other kind of media to share also the experience of what does it mean to work at community level and how can we ensure that at that level too, our reporters, our media workers are protected and safe. So thank you again, starting with the Minister, the PS, to all the government authorities here in Zimbabwe, to the people of Zimbabwe for hosting us in this beautiful city of Victoria Falls, in this World Heritage Site of UNESCO. Thank you to all of you participants, the media stakeholders that have been so much involved in the sub-regional consultations and now also involved here for the final regional one. I wish all of you fruitful deliberations which will lead to a roadmap for the implementation of the UN Plan of Action beyond of its first decade. Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much for hosting us. We are honored. Good morning to you. Good morning, fellow media workers, fellow colleagues, fellow compatriots, fellow comrades in Africa. We are here today to celebrate a very important day that belongs to each one of us, where we are stakeholders And Honorable Minister, you've seen we have civil society, we have government representatives, we have the media networks, we have our ardent partners and supporters of the media in Africa, SIDA, and of course Swedish Embassy. We have many donors that have put their funding into this program within the framework of the UNESCO multi-donor program. Therefore, this morning, mine is to take you through a very short presentation that is to give you an overview of what this process has entailed. And I'll start from where my colleague from MISA has said. We were together in Vienna last week. And Honorable Minister, we were in the room as Africans, but we were not at the table. Why? Because we work in silos, we work in very disjointed manner, we do not advocate our own positions, yet we know really the issues that needs to be brought at the table. So during the first day, which was a civil society day, and MISA was in the room, Media Foundation of West Africa were in the room, apart from the team that was supported by IMS, the rest of the team from Africa, I did not find you in any of the discussions. Fortunately, you had centers as UNESCO, and we had a platform to present the recommendations from Africa, so at least we had that opportunity. But we learned very key lessons that Africans, we not only have to be in the room like you are today, but we need to be part of the discussions, contributing to the recommendations. This presentation is just a highlight, and I'll request whoever is operating to go to the second slide. I will not repeat this because my senior Lydia has already outlined what the UN Plan of Action is all about. And many of you know it came to force in 2012, 10 years ago. And we've already talked about the pillars that are key to this, the 4 pillars, and the fact that the main key objective of this UN Plan of Action is to provide a framework for mobilizing partnership like you are in the room, and efforts to create, of course, the free and safe environment. Therefore, 2022 has provided a unique opportunity for the different stakeholders in all the continents to come together to deliberate on what has been achieved, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities for improvement, and of course, how do we continue in the next 10 years after the UN Plan of Action. Can you go to the next slide? In Africa, and this is one of the things that we were so proud of when we were in Vienna and we were held, we had 5 major consultations. And not just consultations. Your Excellency, these brains you see in this room, last year they came together during the digital platform, the launch of the digital platform for the safety of journalists in Africa. And they said, for a long time in Africa, we have press freedom reports, safety of journalists reports that are done by partners outside Africa. We do not have reports coming from the Africans themselves, a reflection of our own selves saying, this is where we are, these are the challenges, this is where it bites, and this is what we need to do. And during the launch of the digital platform, they said, why don't we review all the indicators that the international partners are using to assess African media, to assess African press freedom, to assess the safety of journalists on the continent, and we see, is there a way we can also come up with a standardized document from us, talking about us, and reflecting the issues that hurt us, to also contribute to this debate, both at the national level, at the regional level, at the global level, so that when we go to these international media meetings or a meeting like this, we also have our own self-reflection that speaks to us and speaks about us. And here I'm talking as one of you, not as UNESCO. So we said, we commissioned a study in Africa. And the media stakeholders came together. We had a report from Southern Africa. We had a report from West Africa. We had a report from Eastern Africa through assessment. And we agreed these are the indicators that we are going to use henceforth to assess press freedom and to assess safety of journalists. So before this whole consultation of the UN Plan of Action was commissioned, Africans had already moved a step further and agreed on indicators and commissioned assessment. The first report was presented this year during the World Press Freedom Day in Arusha. And it is based on that, in that meeting, that we agreed that this is not sufficient. We need to have consultations that are led by our media stakeholders in every region. So Southern Africa, Your Excellency, was the first, led by ably by our MISA and other partners from this region, SAEF, TAEF, all those acronyms. And they came up with they set the pace for the regional consultations, but they also included partners from the entire continent, that is East, West, and Southern, and we did not include North Africa because it's part of the Arab region. Second consultation was led by the Eastern African region, and it was led by the Eastern African Editors Society, which is part of the African Editors Forum. The third consultation was led by our able partners seated there, Media Foundation for West Africa, FX, Federation of African Journalists, Congress of African Journalists, and all the other partners in that region, and it brought together Central and West Africa. After that, and during all this consultation, there were like 3 hours. What was amazing, Your Excellency, and all the partners, there is no single consultation where we had less than 100 people in virtually attending. And in all those meetings, we presented the assessment report, we presented the key issues, we deliberated on what you're going to see in the report that is going to be launched today. After all these reports, before we went to Vienna, we said, let's now all come together and review the recommendations, the challenges, the gaps, the opportunities that have been identified by Africans. So in October, before Vienna, we held a validation meeting, which was led by all now the stakeholders from other regions, and it took over 3.5 hours. And it was amazing that even after 3.5 hours, a virtual meeting, we still had over 80 delegates because it was an interesting topic. So what I'm saying, after all those, what we took to Vienna was very key, was consultative, was participatory, was from different approaches. And I think, to be honest, we, as a continent, we engaged more and more intensively than any other continent when it came to recommendations on the UN Plan of Action. So this is what I'm talking about, and the final recommendations, we were there in the room and at the table, and we presented the Africa recommendations. So can you go to the next slide, sir? In the afternoon, we will have the full presentation of all the recommendations, because the recommendations, as Professor Lydia was outlining, they are all divided into the different focus areas of the thematic areas of the UN Plan of Action. But for this session, and not to keep it for long, we are only taking the key ones from each, just to show you the kind of recommendations. The first one, this, and we are saying from all that we've seen, we are all working and working very seriously, but because of our disjointed efforts, we are not able to come together and produce and be in the room. We are not able to come together and do research. We are not able to come together and publish. We are not able to come together and engage. Therefore, and in Vienna, we realized there was collision of Americans, there was collision of Europe, this, there was collision of this, but in Africa, there was no collision. We were all representing different entities, and this is a challenge. Therefore, one of the recommendations, especially during the validation, that partners said needs to be done very, very fast, is to establish a continent-wide multi-stakeholder coalition for the African media stakeholders and safety of journalists that is going to not only carry the research published annually, but also be able now to coordinate and convene such engagements, be able to propose key recommendations when it comes to whether it's the human rights body at all levels. So this is one of the priorities. The second one, and I'll surprise you, this was proposed by judges. Last month, our colleagues from Tanzania had a judges training on freedom of expression and the safety of journalists, and I was in the room. And one of the recommendations that came from duty bearers, the judges themselves, they give an example of ECOWAS, and ECOWAS we will ask them to share with us how they do it. There's what is called surgery seminars, because as you heard Professor Lydia say, as much as we have all these cases of journalists being killed, being harassed, the impunity rate is so high. But for us to be able to get the people in the room, the duty bearers that are supposed to deal with impunity, we need to have what they call surgery seminars that normally bring in the room all the stakeholders. They present cases to do with journalists in that country, and they discuss and they make recommendations now either to the lawyers or to the judge. I mean, it's something that really was amazing. So this is something we need to study further, but it was recommended that we need to do that. The other thing that has been discussed in our consultations is that we come up with African Media Lawyers Network within the framework of the Pan-African Lawyers Union. This is to enable those journalists that are facing cases and have no legal support to get this kind of support. It has been implemented actually in some countries, but not in all. So we need to borrow some of those good practices and replicate this kind of a practice first at the continental level and then at the national level. Then, one of the challenges we have in Africa is that everybody is doing monitoring, reporting on cases and violations, but there is no standardized approach. And all these good reports that come from different partners sometimes end up on the shelves because, first of all, there is no platform for raising the cases with the duty bearer, especially with the member states. And there is also no standardized formula on how do you monitor, how do you verify, how do you fact check, how do you make sure that you disseminate this information, how does it reach to the people that it's supposed to reach, especially the governments. So one of the recommendations is that we will review all the monitoring and reports that are being done at the continental level, and this body that will be the priority, will come up with a standardized framework for monitoring and reporting. And as you know, on this point, we have the digital platform for safety of journalists that everybody globally actually is one of the good practices that we presented at Vienna. But unfortunately, it has so many weaknesses because we do not have the human capacity. It is not managed by full-time staff. TAEV, African Editors Forum, is volunteering to manage this platform, but as you can understand, it needs a full-time. It was a replica of the Council of Europe platform on digital platform for safety of journalists. They give us the technical capacity, they give us the advice, but in terms of making it very effective, able to have focal points at every region in Africa, able to monitor and to report, and also to make sure that this information feeds into the African Union mechanism, the special rapporteur on freedom of expression and the safety of journalists. There are very many gaps. Therefore, we have a lot of alerts that have been uploaded on the digital platform, but they just remain as good as alerts. And the fact that the alerts are being collected from different stakeholders, and all these stakeholders are using different monitoring mechanisms. So it is a challenge, even in terms of at the studying, is this alert verified, fact-checked, and who is issuing it, and how does it actually, how is it going to be disseminated widely, and not just widely, but to the right people that are supposed to address the issues on impunity. We can go to the next slide. These are also other recommendations, and some of them came as much as there were regional consultations, there were also thematic consultations. One on academic research, the other one on safety of journalists for women because it's a special category. And some of the recommendations that we've also taken on board as Africans is, of course, the establishment of mechanism, national coordination mechanism. Africa is a first. We have good practices, especially from the Eastern Africa region and from West Africa. We've been monitoring and seeing Media Foundation is also supporting quite a number. Ghana is there and quite a number of countries. But we need to replicate this approach where the duty bearers, the right bearers have a coordination framework at the national level, at the sub-regional level, where they can come up with their own national plan and be able to have everyone in the room, whether it's the academia, civil society, the media, the three arms of the government representatives, so that the whole discussion involves all the stakeholders. So this is encouraged, and we are going to support the African Union member states to establish national coordination mechanism, and also at the sub-regional level to do the same. The second one is, of course, about strategic engagement of the duty bearers. In this whole discussion, Your Excellency, the people that we miss in the room that are so key when it comes to addressing impunity are I would say the three arms of the government. We did try this in Uganda, where we had a representative from parliament, from the police, from the judiciary, and the information emanating from the coordination framework then is able to trickle down to the relevant government to address, for example, if a journalist has been killed. In Kenya and in Somalia, we have what we call prosecutors. In Somalia, my colleagues are here, prosecutors who is supposed to be the focal person for safety of journalists. In some countries, like in Kenya, they have a desk within the police. And in various countries, I think these mechanisms are there, but they are not all standardized, and the approach is very different. Of course, the country context matters, but this is something that we need to work together within that coalition that we agreed. The academic research is missing. I don't know how many. Do you have academia in the room, School of Journalism, Mass Communication? Because they are key. If we don't have research, if we don't have researchers in the room, if we don't continue carrying and updating the data, the information that we have, then we are missing a very key, important stakeholder. So this is one of the things that we're also going to work at to ensure that they are part of the discussion and contribute to the knowledge development and exchange. Then, of course, this is something that was strongly recommended, the journalism curriculum. You can see most of the journalism institutions, whether at the university level, middle level, they're still using the old modules. Yet, there are so many emerging issues, including how can journalists use artificial intelligence in reporting? How can we have safety of journalists module, whether it's digital security or all these emerging issues in the training, so that journalism emerging from schools have these skills. This is missing, and we will work with other partners in the afternoon. Of course, these are issues we'll be discussing. Who would be able to lead what and who is doing what, that we can, of course, take those good practices and build on that. The last one, they said very clearly that the UN Plan of Action is currently not really able to cover or to provide good support on journalists in exile as it is as a document. But of course, on the ground, many activities are taking place. They recommended this very strongly. The next slide, only 2 slides and I'm done. So, colleagues, Your Excellency and partners, after 10 years of implementing the UN Plan of Action in the different countries in Africa, and in the format that you have taken at whatever level, It gives us a very good opportunity now to leverage on the successes that we can take these good practices. The report captures that. What are the success stories from Africa? We have captured that in the report, the complete report. We've also captured what are the challenges that have been faced and the recommendations on how do we address these challenges. And it is also an opportunity for us now, and that's why we're in this room, to map our renewed course. How do we tackle these issues now? Do we continue working the way we are doing? By doing so, does the environment for safety of journalists in Africa become better? And we have identified all that, but how do we translate all these recommendations, which are contained in a whole document that we shall present in the afternoon? How do we translate all these efforts into actions and make an impact on safety of journalists in Africa? Are they going to remain a very beautiful document, very good recommendations? We've done so much work from last year. Assessment, consultation, spent our money online, engagements, and everyone. And I must confess that in those meetings, we also had, of course, representatives from the Office of the High Commissioner. We had the representatives from embassies, particularly the Austria embassy that was leading the global conference. We had representatives from, of course, the different development partners. And we also had representatives from the national commissions. Madam, Your Excellency, I'm sorry I did not get your name, but the National Commissions for UNESCO that represent the government in every country. Government representatives at UNESCO, they were all in the room. So these recommendations, I can tell you, they are not just from civil society, they are not just from the media, but they are from all the stakeholders. In fact, in those consultations, we also brought academia, and they had sessions of presentation and engaging with us. So the last slide. I love this proverb, and I picked this proverb in my career. I've been in UNESCO for the last 23 years, Professor, 23 years before you are all born. So, and I used to work in a Namibia office, UNESCO Namibia Viduk. And there's this proverb in Joburg at the airport. I picked it from there, and every country that I've gone, whenever I'm heading a presentation, I always remind people that if you want to go fast, go it alone. But if you want to go very far, let us work together. Thank you very much.
Reports that we are unveiling today. One is the legal and regulatory framework. 2, media pluralism and diversity. 3, journalism safety and protection. 4, media independence. 5, internet access and affordability. 6, media self-regulation. 7, surveillance and privacy of online communications. And number 8 is online content producers, the independent ones, particularly. After we developed these indicators, we had a validation meeting with various stakeholders around Africa. It was online. I think this was in December. So all the media development agencies around the region came together to review these draft indicators in an online stakeholder meeting. The feedback was received, and then we had an online consultation where additional feedback was produced, and then we finalized the indicators, after which research was commissioned in the different regions of the continent. In Southern Africa, MISA was the leader of that research. In Eastern Africa, it was the East African Editors Society. In Western Africa, it was RSF. In May, we produced a small version of the report, consolidating the findings from the different regions, specifically focused on World Press Freedom Day, where the theme was journalism under siege in the digital space. So this one focused on journalism and journalists and the safety concerns that they face in the digital sphere. We then consolidated those various reports from the different sub-regions to produce what we have today as the final report. And then that draft was also, subjected to review by the likes of AFEX and Media Foundation and East Africa Editors Society and the Africa Center for Media Excellence. And then that brings us to what we have today. So that was one strand of the methodology that we employed in developing this report. And we'll go to the second, which I will run through more quickly, because it's basically the consultations for the plan of action, on assessment. So the assessment of the plan of action, as ably explained by Lydia, formed the second strand through which we gathered data that has informed the report here we have on media safety, on media freedom and journalism safety. So again here, there were consultations, one led by Southern Africa, another by Eastern Africa, another by Western Central Africa. And then we had a continent-wide engagement also involving different stakeholders, all of which produced very good information on the state of play and fed into the report that we're having. So there were very many steps there. The first meeting, as Lydia said, was in Arusha on the plan of action assessments, developing the Africa guide for the regional consultations. And then the consultations themselves were based on those 6 areas, again, as was demonstrated by the UNESCO regional rep and by Lydia. Next slide, please. Various consultations, again, as we saw, Eastern Africa, led by Editors Society, Southern Africa by MISA and others, Western Central by Media Foundation for Western Africa, AFEX, Federation of African Journalists, etc. It's important to note that all the consultations, although they were led by stakeholders in a particular region, they were attended by stakeholders from all over Africa. They were not only attended by Southern Africa, because it is the Southern Africans that are leading on consultations on particular tracks of the plan of action. And then again, like I said, we had a regional validation meeting specific to the plan of action to look at the final recommendations. Next slide, please. So that was the method that was used to develop this report. Now, in terms of the report itself, it is organized on the basis of the 8 assessment areas or indicators, which we went through and which can be seen again on the board. And we will go through pretty quickly through some of the key takeaways from each of these. So the report indicates that the right freedom of expression and media freedom continues to be under threat in many of the countries in the region. There have been some major gains, but in many areas, those gains have been reeled back by actions of both state and non-state stakeholders. The previous slide, please. Yeah, so one of the gains is that many constitutions today recognize freedom of expression and access to information. Many countries have also enacted laws that are specific on media freedom and access to information. And many countries have ratified international instruments on human rights. That's the positive element, but there is always the downside in many of the countries, namely that unfortunately, the enjoyment of these rights is sometimes limited by other national laws that put general limitations and sometimes criminalize free expression. In many countries also, we see that many laws grant excessive powers to political appointees to direct and regulate the media sectors and do not put sufficient safeguards against the abuse of those powers. When we look at diversity, there are many elements there, and we see that pluralism and diversity remain serious challenges in many of the countries. The high cost of setting up media houses, the skewed programming, the self-censorship, there are very many issues where the power of advertisers, including the government, the power of media owners, all undermine the degree to which media are able to provide pluralistic information and to engender meaningful diversity. Voices, issues affecting marginalized groups remain in many instances excluded. Print media seeing a bit of decline, radio remains a big source, and online media is emerging in many countries, remains largely elitist, and faces very many issues of credibility and professionalism in many of the countries. Next slide, please. So this is one of the indicators that speaks quite specifically to the issue of safety of journalists and impunity. And from the research, it is clear that in many parts of the continent, journalists and media workers continue to experience endless attacks that include killings, torture, enforced disappearance, arbitrary arrest and detention, intimidation, threats, and other forms of violence, which is very worrying considering that we are witnessing this situation 10 years after the plan of action came into play. Also worrying is that as the attacks on journalists are growing, the perpetrators are rarely held to account for their actions. The UNESCO rep, I think, gave a figure of 14% of journalist killings where there is successful prosecution. In this fair continent, we haven't done research, but from the evidence we have, the level of investigation, first of all, and the level of prosecution, much less the level of successful prosecution, is extremely low. In Somalia, there have been killings, I think, of 52 journalists in a decade. One case this year is probably the only successful prosecution for all those killings. Again, in terms of attacks, we see that there is increasing amounts of arrest and prosecution of journalists and online content creators. And these stem from many of the cyber laws that countries have enacted, which appear to concentrate on controlling, on prohibiting, rather than encouraging the use of digital platforms as avenues for extending freedom of expression, for enabling citizen organizing, for enabling citizens to access and create information without undue restrictions and fears of reprisals. The other issue which we are seeing and which was mentioned earlier a bit is trolling and online harassment of journalists. This is commonplace Sometimes media houses are attacked. Sometimes individual journalists are attacked. And we are seeing more worryingly, again, online harassment of female journalists in many parts of the continent. And these attacks tend to be sexualized. I think it was the person from MISA who was alluding to this. And they take very many gendered and sexualized forms, body shaming, for instance, even threats of rape, or even calls for rape against female journalists. Again, this is something where we are seeing a lot of it, but the extent of the problem is not well known. The effects of the problem, whether it's psychological, whether it is how people change their behaviors online, for instance, through not engaging online or self-censorship, those effects have not been sufficiently studied. The evidence, though, suggests the problem is big, is growing, it is affecting the social, the psychological well-being of journalists, and it is undermining their ability to function. Final one on this is conflicts. In many parts of the continent, we are seeing that conflicts are exacerbating the attacks on journalists. Somalia, for 6 years running, has been the most dangerous country for journalists to operate in, according to the Global Impunity Index. That means countries where journalists are killed because of their work, but there is no justice in terms of investigation and prosecution of offenders. September, October, there were killings of journalists in Ethiopia. There were injuries to other journalists in the course of their work. As stated earlier, 52 journalists killed in that country. But also, when you look at the Sahel, countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, parts of northern Nigeria, there is the militant insurgency, which has resulted in very many media safety challenges, the military restricting where journalists can go or not go, introduction of laws that restrict what journalists may say about the military, attacks of journalists, killings, abductions of journalists, all of those being perpetrated in situations where there are conflicts. I'll run faster now. Again, on media independence, and this report is available online, so I don't have to really go through everything. It can be accessed online. We see very many challenges around media independence that are faced in the region. Many of media houses are heavily reliant on government advertisement for survival. There's too much influence from media owners. In many cases, the media owners also have serious political interests. In many countries, they are part of the ruling government or its interests. Private advertisers have their own undue influence that affects how media are able to operate independently, which ultimately has a bearing on the level of media freedom. Number 5 is internet access and affordability. Digital technologies obviously offer a lot of benefits for journalists and journalists, for journalism and journalists. But there are challenges. Especially in terms of cyber-related laws that claw back on the space for free expression, the space for access to information, etc. But also on how governments increasingly are monitoring online spaces and appearing to target critical journalists, whether they are sort of mainstream or independent media creators. We see also some worrying trends on the continent that affect media freedom, such as digital taxation. which undermines the ability of citizens to use digital mediums, the ability of journalists and media houses to publish and access different audiences. The other one is internet disruptions, what are normally called internet shutdowns. These have become commonplace in many countries. They are instituted for various reasons by the government, mainly issues of public safety or national security or preserving public order, especially around elections, especially around protests, but also around exams. And last year we saw these shutdowns in 12 countries. Excuse me. Burkina Faso, Chad, Congo, Eswatini, Ethiopia, Gabon, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, South Sudan, Uganda, and Zambia. The bottom line, if we may continue, is that these internet disruptions, one, affect the confidence of citizens to engage online because they know the government is watching. But the more immediately is that they affect the free flow of information and the ability of citizens to express themselves and access pluralistic and diverse information, and for the media, of course, to seek and receive information. Number 6 out of 8 is media self-regulation. We see a lot of experiments here. We haven't yet seen a lot of success in this regard. The idea of self-regulation is that it is touted as a guarantor of high ethical and professional standards in journalism when we are assessing ourselves, when our peers are assessing us. But this has not worked as we think it should, and it's an area in which we all need to put our heads together to see how can we improve on self-regulation, how can it work alongside other forms of regulation in order to, one, protect freedoms, but also ensure there is professionalism. That one we can jump. Second to last is surveillance and privacy of online communication. There are many countries in the region that have passed laws that have a negative bearing on privacy. It's not bad to have laws that enable legal surveillance. Every country in the world conducts surveillance. It is okay. The problem comes when you have laws, for instance, that give broad powers to certain state agencies. The problem comes where there is abuse of these surveillance powers. The problem comes when there is limited oversight and transparency of state surveillance activities. In many countries, you require a court order in order to access and monitor somebody's communications. In some countries, many actors can order monitoring and surveillance of communications without going to courts of law. Secondly, there are many instances where surveillance is conducted. A court order is required, but a court order has not been received. Now, the more worryingly is that in a couple of countries, according to the research findings, the surveillance targets critics, who include journalists. It targets political opponents, not terrorists, but people who are espousing opinions that are different from those of the state, of the government. That is where the problem is. we can continue. So there's a couple of issues. There's been very many instances of malware, that is surveillance technology found either on phones or laptops of journalists, which is perpetrated by state actors, which are detailed in the report that you'll be able to see once you run through it. Finally, is the issue of independent online content producers. Because digital technologies have enabled very many people to be able to create content, to be journalists in their own sense, taking away the monopoly which print and online media used to have as the drivers of opinion, as the creators of content. There are now very many independent content creators around the continent, enabled, of course, by access to digital technologies. So we have the bloggers, citizen journalists, etc. So blogging, social media have provided people with alternative ways of distributing information and exercising the right freedom of expression in various countries, including countries where the media that is regulated has come under very many repressive regulations. Next, please. So, but we are seeing a lot of elements which are affecting the operations of this, mainly criminalization of speech online through laws that claim they are fighting fake news or false news. In many countries, it's now required that digital media and independent creators of content are licensed and pay annual fees. There's also a lot of intimidation, arrests, and prosecution of journalists over online content, all of which raise concerns on media and general freedom of expression. I think in many of the countries, the individuals that have been in recent years arrested have either been independent media producers of our online content or journalists that produced content online. So it's become sort of a new battlefield in terms of press freedom. So there we have a number of countries that have increased their laws and regulations on disinformation, what they call false news, hate speech, etc., that are problematic. We can continue, and some countries that are using this to criminalize. The licensing and registration requirements, again, are a problem for these content creators, as outlined in the report. And finally, I think we are going to go to recommendations very quickly before summing this up. It's actually conclusions. So the report shows that the continent has registered some gains in terms of media development, including the growth in the number of media houses, mostly online media and broadcasts. There has also been growth in progressive laws, and there's been growth in the level of professionalism, particularly with legacy media that are regulated. However, journalists and media houses continue to face mounting challenges in relation to their work, as outlined in my preceding remarks. But while the attacks on journalists are growing in many countries, perpetrators, who often include security agents and other state officials, are rarely held accountable for their actions. Tuendelee tafadhali, Kiswahili there. So we make a number of recommendations there. Some of them are drawn from or related to the plan of action, because if you recall, the plan of action was one of the two strands that fed into the data generation and validation for the report. There are roles for the government, There are roles for media support organizations. There are roles for individual media houses. And there is a lot in terms of developing partnerships for different actors to work together in order to advance media freedom, media professionalism, and journalism safety around the continent. Research institutions, international bodies, for them as well, there are recommendations that the report is making, which you'll be able to see in the report. Next slide, please. So, thank you very much. Yeah, that's it from me. We'll be discussing the report at length and the recommendations together with the plan of action in the sessions that will come after this one. Thank you for listening to me.
We have spoken a lot about the report. The report is available online. I hope they're going to share the link. But for now, may I please ask Professor Lydia Brito, PS, Dr. Wakabi, and the Minister to come forward, please, with the report, so that we can just take a picture of it. I haven't read it myself. I'll read it later, so that I don't preempt anything. Don't ask me what's in the report. I'm too junior to be in the picture. Oh, yes, representative from civil society. Media Foundation for West Africa, the East African Editors Society. Saif? Yes. Okay, I'll represent Misa and Father Panapas. Please, Father Panapas. Yeah, smiling was getting tiring. It was tiring. I felt for you, Minister. All right. The Minister has been taking notes. I was just looking at your notepad. It's as thick as the Bible now. When I call it to finally speak, good luck. Right, just before we invite the PEMSEC, I'm going to ask just a number of colleagues just to give solidarity remarks. I'm going to start with IMS Rashid. Please come forward and give us some remarks on solidarity remarks. I'm timing, it's exactly 2 minutes, I'm timing them.
Thank you, Nkaba, and good, is it afternoon now? Good afternoon, colleagues. Honorable Minister, thank you for being here. I was with your family in the flight. He is well. We dropped him in Bulawayo. Permanent Secretary, colleagues from UNESCO, our senior teams from UNESCO, our funders from various agencies, CEDA, among others here. I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion for one reason, that probably for the first time as Africans, we are beginning to take charge on issues around safety of journalists. We are beginning to rethink of our contribution and how we do our work and support each other on issues of safety that are affecting many of our colleagues in this part of the world. We are also rethinking around issues of safety in a changing global community, in which safety is not only an issue of violence, but also an issue of climate change, an issue of COVID-19, which also killed a number of our colleagues in the past 2 years. We are also rethinking safety in the era in which our audiences, our societies are more engaged. So communicators of information, be it our government officials and others, can now share information without us as journalists. And how do we engage on issues of safety in which our messages are challenged, in which our messages are pushed back in what others are now calling the post-truth world. So this gathering is inspiring, and I hope that we will come out of this with a more cohesive platforms and sustainable solidarity platforms that we can sustain as a continent going into the future. We need to work more closely together as we face common challenges. It could be cross-border crime, it could be climate change, it could be natural disasters, it could be a coordination around policy issues, digital or otherwise, that we need to work together. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to have you, to welcome you to be part of this process. I'm happy to be part of this discussion. I'm happy to have a diversity of colleagues coming from parts of the African regions that are normally excluded from these platforms. Colleagues from Somalia, colleagues from Ethiopia, many times they are not included in these dialogues. And today and tomorrow we'll be having them here. And I look forward to this meeting coming up with a comprehensive way forward in terms of how we work together. And one thing that we cannot ignore, and my happiness again with the presence of multilateral partners like UNESCO and also our government representatives at the highest level of the ministry, is that we cannot afford not to engage. Whilst we uphold the principles, but what we need to place at the center of our processes is continued engagement with our governments, with various authorities. So for our senior government officials represented by Honorable Minister Mchangwa, we thank you for this engagement. I often engage in many tours with the Permanent Secretary Nick Mangwana. We may hold different views on many issues, but what I've told him, and honestly so, is that we are happy because he engages. And that is an issue and an approach that we hope we can encourage in many parts of the African continent where we are coming from. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Speaking of Somali colleagues, we're very grateful you could come. I'll be sleeping and I wake up at 4 a.m. just to check the time, and I'll find a message from Rashid. Do the Somalis have visas now? I was stressed. I couldn't sleep. I was afraid to touch my phone. Have you paid for their visas? Have you gone to the visa department? So we're very grateful that you guys could come, and thank you, Rashid, for pushing for that. Then I would like to ask a representative of the Swedish Embassy to come and give remarks.
Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. Dear colleagues and partners and friends, I am representing the Swedish Development Corporation. I'm Marianne von Malmborg from SIDA, and we have traveled from Stockholm to be here today. And we also have our colleague from the Swedish Embassy in Harare here. And first of all, I must say that thank you for making us feeling so welcome here in this country and in this part of the world, in this region. Lydia, the UNESCO team, but also all of you that we have met here today. Let me express also how proud and honored we are to be part of this event today, these days here in Vic Falls. We consider it a milestone event. We see already that there will be new commitments from this, strengthened commitments, new partnerships, strengthened partnerships, and also new steps forward, concrete steps forward. So this is very important, and also we are again reminded about the urgency to create a safe environment for journalists and media, and for them to be playing a crucial role for a sound democratic society, giving voice and giving choice to people so that they in return can contribute to their respective societies that they're living in. Also, I want to say, my colleague, she said that sometimes at an event like this, the tea break is the most important. That's where you meet and greet people. And I can agree with that. We met a very strong and committed minister. We met very brave, strong and committed female journalists over there. And we are also very, very pleased to see that many of the partners that we from the Stockholm headquarters provide with global support. They are here. We have met with Women in News, IMS, and we know also IFX, APC are also partners of ours. And for us, this is the purpose why we are here also. We need to understand and learn how our work is working on a national level and what it really does to people. So with that said, I also want to stress again the importance of having an event like this that bring together all of you, duty bearers, rights holders, practitioners, policymakers, enablers. So all good forces are needed in this endeavor. So thank you so much for having us. Thank you.
One of the reports that we produce as the Media Institute of Southern Africa is called the State of Press Freedom in Southern Africa report. We have produced it for the past 2 years, and we have been ably supported, obviously by UNESCO, using terms that Zimbabweans will understand, our all-weather friends, UNESCO, and also IMS and the Swedish Embassy. We are very grateful for the support of the report that will come. I hope this sounds like I'm pitching for next year's report, and for the support that you'll give us. No, thank you very much. I'll now ask the UNESCO NATCOM office, National Commission Office Secretary General, to come and give her remarks. I just heard the minister clearing her throat. Be prepared.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Allow me to write on the protocols already observed. Ladies and gentlemen, National Commission for UNESCO, what is it? Maybe I think we should actually know what it is before we can proceed. The National Commission for UNESCO, in all the 193 member states of UNESCO, we call ourselves the conduit between UNESCO and our national governments. In this case, the Zimbabwe National Commission for UNESCO is the conduit between the government of Zimbabwe and UNESCO Global. We always call it UNESCO Global. We are there to ensure that those UNESCO programs are implemented at national level. I'm happy that this room is full of people from the media fraternity, and our door is always open for you to work with us. I'm actually happy looking at this gathering, Honorable Minister, that we are observing UNESCO's global priorities, gender and Africa. Gender, I think it has already been referred to that we have so many female journalists in the room. Africa, we are already in Africa. And that priority we are always saying, as UNESCO implements its programs globally, can we focus on Africa, a continent that was forgotten? But we are now saying, can we bring them up to speed so that they are on the same level playing field with the rest of the regions of the world? If you look at UNESCO's program for the current biennium, that is 2022 and 2023, you'll find that it has about 9 outcomes. And one of the outcomes is very specific to what we are talking about here. Freedom of expression. Sorry, you have to forgive me. This gadget always plays up when I'm supposed to be using it. Promote freedom of expression and the right to information. And under that particular outcome, what do we find? One of the outputs, member states have strengthened capacities and raised awareness to enhance norms and policies related to freedom of expression, press freedom, safety of journalists, including women journalists, and the right to access to information online and offline. Presentations that have been made here have been alluding to all this. All what I would like to highlight is that in UNESCO, we are not leaving anyone behind. We are watching the backs of the journalists, ensure that at the end of the day, we have articulated their needs through our governments, of course. And I'm happy that the Honorable Minister is here. And for me, I'm actually glad and very happy that she is here. That also means that our government, that is the government of Zimbabwe, is committed to the issue that of why we are sitting in this room. And actually to further emphasize our government's commitment to the issue at hand, you will find that, we have heard of capacity development, the training of the judiciary, the training of law enforcement, and what is the government of Zimbabwe doing in that? Besides what the Minister of Information, Broadcasting and Broadcasting Services is doing. We are also joining the rest of Africa, and I think it's Eastern and Southern Africa, in a training in Mombasa, Kenya, on the safety of journalists. In this instance, we have 2 senior officers from the Zimbabwe Republic Police who will be participating in that training program. What more commitment would you look for? All I'm saying at the end of the day is, as the ZimNatCom, we are committed to working with the Regional Office for Southern Africa, UNESCO ROSA as we affectionately call it, our Minister of Information and Broadcasting Services, and incidentally, we work with about 10 different ministries in this country. But I would really like to say, we are with you as you make your journey, reviewing the action plan, celebrating or commemorating the day. All I can urge you is that as you are doing that review, as you are taking stock of what has happened in the past decade, as we are taking stock, or rather, as we are looking at what the future holds for us, remember those 4 Ps that were talked about earlier on. Journalists are a critical element in any country. They are the ones that help to ensure that information is disseminated. And of course, we would want their safety to be ensured as well. I wish you fruitful deliberations as we move forward in the next 2 days. Thank you.
This is just my hunch without evidence. I have no evidence, but I'm just going to say it. Earlier in the day, I called on the peers to come and speak. I don't know, maybe it was stage fright. So he asked everyone to introduce themselves so that he fixes himself and gets ready to speak. And then when everyone introduced themselves, he came up with another excuse. He changed the program around. So now, I hope you've gathered yourself and there's no excuse and no running away. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies, Mr. Ngawa. Did I get it right? Is that a thing? No, it wasn't stage fright. It was, we were just making sure that our T's were crossed and our I's dotted. You probably had the stage fright because you forgot that we had visitors from other countries and we could not get, our national anthem could not get expression. We just dived in and we were going. So we had to tidy up a few things. But distinguished guests, I don't do too many salutations, primarily because I'm introducing somebody who is supposed to come and do all the salutations and acknowledgements. So it's not ignorance of protocol, but it's quite necessary. My role is to introduce our guest of honor to you all. Our guest of honor's history is this big, and I intend to read every word. Please don't be so uptight. Our guest of honor is a liberator of this country because she left this country when she was 15 to go and train to be a guerrilla and fight for our independence. When she was there, one of the critical roles she played was to be the personal assistant to our current president. So the working together history of our guest of honor and our head of state goes as far back as the 70s. I think this is where, like somebody else said earlier, that some of you were not born then. I'm sure a lot of you were not born then. If you were born, thanks for looking very young. And our guest of honor came back from the war, joined the diplomatic services, served this country in various capacities, and came back again to the country, and then joined the government. And she worked as a deputy minister for a number of ministries, but which include this ministry. She also was in the panel that drafted the constitution of this country. She wasn't only in the panel, but she was a co-vice chairman of that panel. We call it COPAC. She also headed the Women's Caucus at regional level or subcontinental level, meaning that her influence in as far as gender parity advocacy goes or went beyond our boundaries. She then became the Minister of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services in 2018 at the advent of what we call the Second Republic. Now, in the last 4 years, what she has done and what she has led is what is in this book. But like I said, I'm a very boring speaker. I do not want to bore you too long. I'll just read a few things. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be reading from the book from the report that has just been launched. So, in the last 4 years of the Second Republic, she led in the repealing of a piece of legislation most of you, especially those from our space in Zimbabwe, found quite objectionable. We had a piece of law called Access to Information and Protection of Privacy, or IPA. And a lot of you did not like it. So our guest of honor led to its repealing. And we brought in a piece of legislation through a leadership called Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. We have a number of people from different countries. I think this piece of legislation compares to the piece of legislation in the United Kingdom, a piece of legislation by the same name, by the way, in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Canada, and I think South Africa has got the same piece of legislation by the same name again. We compare very well, or if not better, to those pieces of legislation, all thanks to our guest of honor. And now, in this report, the state of media, and obviously my brother Rashid Mukundu, who spoke and by giving the first solidarity message, knows that I don't fully agree with everything in the report. But that's all about diversity and plurality you are talking about, isn't it? So, but let me quote from it, because I want to make an attribution to our guest of honor. It says, Zimbabwe licensed, sorry, by the way, those who have the report, I'm on page 18, last paragraph. Zimbabwe licensed 8 new community stations in the last quarter of 2021. It says 8 new, meaning there were others before. So, our guest of honor, when she took over as in a current job as Minister of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services, there was not even a single community station in this country. Now, the last quarter of only last year, 8 more were licensed. Of course, the report proceeds to say bringing the total number of licensed community stations to 14. So in the last 4 years, this is one of your achievements. It goes further in the report to say more than 40 years after independence, Zimbabwe has only, it says has, only 1 television station. But further down, the same report says, in 2020, the government licensed 6 television broadcasters. So after 40 years, when there was only 1 television station, in the last 4 years, she has licensed 6 more. I think that she deserves a round of applause. And it says, which are yet to start operations? No. The breaking news is more than a majority of those are operational. And what the report doesn't capture is also that She led in the licensing of 8 campus radio stations at our institutions of higher and tertiary education. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like you to put your hands together for Honorable Senator Muchangwa, who is our guest of honor.
Thank you very much, PS. That's my permanent secretary. Am I supposed to hold this? Oh, I guess yes. Thank you very much, Permanent Secretary. Truly, to the fact, what I do it because I believe in it. That's what I know. The reason why young people, that generation left, was for looking for rights for each and everyone, to remove polarization, to remove completely discrimination for the benefit of all. And so you just need to know that no matter how busy I am, when important conference like this one, Professor, I had to leave everything and be in Victoria Falls. This is a very important one. Let me first of all salute the Director of Ceremonies, Baba Machazi. I'm not going to repeat what the Permanent Secretary said about the Director of Ceremonies. I think that has been heard. I salute my PS, who is the Permanent Secretary for the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services. Then I want to go to my dear sister, the UNESCO Regional Office of Southern Africa Director and Representative, Professor Linda Arthur Brito, a good dear sister, and for me it's very emotional. She is born in Mozambique. I left this country when I was hardly 14 years, 15 years, and I lived in Mozambique up to independence. And I must say, I met my husband, Mr. Mukundu said. I met him in the struggle, and my firstborn son was born in Maputo Central Hospital. I want to salute you and thank you for putting together such a wonderful, wonderful conference. I listened to Madam Lydia Gachungi, the Regional Advisor on Freedom of Expression and Safety of Journalists, and I really enjoyed, and you could see that I was taking a lot of notes, and that shows the importance of that report which you gave us. The National Commission for UNESCO Secretary General, Madam Chirapa, we thank you very much, especially the issue you emphasized on observing gender. It is also important to focus on Africa. There's nothing which will ever come for us if we are not involved. And we want to continue as Africans to promote freedom of expression, in particular gender equality. Media Institute of Southern Africa, Mr. Regional Governing Council members, who is also the spokesperson, I'm told, Father Barnabas Matenda, we thank you very much for those words. And I think I'm tempted to salute our professor, Professor Magosongwe, the chairperson of Zimbabwe Media Commission, one of the 12 commissions of the Constitution. I know there are a number of senior government officials who are here present, and our key partners. I really salute you. Once again, you heard all the glorious work which has been done, community radios which are now on air, with fully equipped studios, well-trained presenters. Without some of these partners, we would not have been able to be where we are today. in this particular case without leaving anybody, I hope, UNESCO, MISA, International Media Support. We like you and we want to work with everybody. And media monitors, representatives of Southern African Development Community, that's SADC, Africa Union, Swedish Embassy, Zimbabwe Media Commission, of course, the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe, which is our statutory body, which has managed to license those 14 community radio stations you've been told about, the 8 campus radio stations, and they've done that without fear or favor. Media Alliance Zimbabwe, we work with you all the time, Mars. We are very proud you are here. Zimbabwe National Editors Forum, ZINEF, I've seen you, you are here. The African Editors Forum, Southern Africa Editors Forum, who are here. Women in News, during tea time, I also had an opportunity to meet some of my sisters from Somaliland and Somalia. And of course, they were together with my sister, Susan Makore, who is also our board member at ZMC. Gender Media Connect, Namibia Media Trust, African Freedom of Expression Exchange, Media Foundation of West Africa, Collaboration of International ICT Policy for East and Southern Africa, CIPESA. And I just want to welcome all the other sisters and brothers who I may not have mentioned, but I will mention their names, their countries, because this is very important and we are proud to host you here at Victoria Falls. Those from Namibia, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Somaliland, Somalia, Austrian Embassy, Southern Africa Editors Forum, I think I spoke about that, Swedish Embassy, Mali, Lesotho, Zambia, Uganda, DRC, Botswana, Malawi, Eswatini, Kenya. We want to welcome you to our beautiful country. This is home, away from home for all of you. Truly so. When Professor Brito spoke, she spoke about the importance of Victoria Falls being a UNESCO heritage site. And here we are at Victoria Falls, Moso-Atunya, one of the 7 wonders of the world, and right at the border of 2 countries who are conserving that beautiful heritage. I hope you all have an opportunity to visit our tourist attractions, because there is a lot to see in Victoria Falls. Those who want game drives, beautiful game drives, those who want to go sunset cruise, and those who just want to meet the people of this country who are very hospitable. They smile, they enjoy meeting people from other places of the world. They want to learn a lot from others. So I hope you get that opportunity before you go back. Let me take this opportunity to welcome you all once again to this auspicious event where issues of crime against journalists take center stage. It really gives me great pleasure to address this regional conference hosted in my country as we commemorate the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. Safety of journalists, their welfare, issues of equality are very close to the government of this country. There is no better proof than that, the fact that I am here on a day when I have got other commitments, but because of the importance of this conference, I'm here with you. Yes, this year marks the 10th anniversary of the United Nations Plan of Action, UNPA, on the safety of journalists, and the commemorations have come at a time when the issue of impunity for crimes against journalists continues unabated. Commemorations like this one helps bring violations and crimes against this noble profession and media workers under the spotlight. And when I mean how serious this profession is, that we've shown as a Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services, when we were confronted by the global epidemic of COVID-19, we made sure that our journalists, at a time when there was lockdown, we had to fight to make sure that they are put as essential services. They were the first in the category of those to be vaccinated when we first got our initial load of vaccines. Because we understand the work you do, we won't be able to succeed in any way as a ministry without the support of our journalists in our mandate of educating, informing, and entertaining. Yes, we have witnessed the presumed death of Azori Gwanda in Tanzania, the enforced disappearance of Ibrahimu Mbaruso in Mozambique, the death of Samo Wazizi in Cameroon, and the death of Shireen Abu Enko in the West Bank in May this year, among many others. Attacks on media workers continue incessantly across the world, with countries that are renowned strongholds of democracy sliding down on the World Press Freedom Indexes. Sadly, those who perpetrate crimes against journalists go unpunished. We should not be the case, as there are laws that protect and give journalists the freedom to perform their duties without fear. As a country, we have made the safety of journalists an issue of high priority. Hence, our enactment of the Freedom of Information Act to provide both the media and the public legislature protection in their quest to access information. We have taken note of a few isolated reported cases of journalists being harassed at some political rallies, and we have rebuked the political parties that allow their supporters to violate the rights of journalists and their freedom to access stories. And this is true. We have had a number, our offices are open to all our journalists, both private and public. And in cases where there have been issues where journalists find themselves in problems, they call direct to our Permanent Secretary's office, and some even call direct to me, and we always run around to make sure that we help our journalists. Forums such as this help sensitize institutions, political players, and the public that the world frowns upon those who violate freedom of expression and freedom of the media with impunity. Ladies and gentlemen, as we get closer to the 2023 harmonized election in our country, I would like to add my voice to that of His Excellency, our President, Comrade Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, when he calls out for peaceful and non-violence against journalists. This is why a month ago, as a ministry in Kadoma, we gathered together with all stakeholders, including political players, media players, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, SEC, and the police. We did this in a 2-day workshop, and this was to find a common ground on elections reporting. Let me reiterate, the government of Zimbabwe, under the able leadership of His Excellency Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, is very committed in providing a safe operating media environment and to guaranteeing freedom of the press to ensure that media practitioners execute their duties freely for the attainment of Vision 2030. Ombere, you can actually, there's been a lot of work which the Second Republic has done. We have seen other people who have continued to remain in that First Republic. But what we say is what we are doing. We walk our talk. We want you to bring any issues on board so that we can deal with them. We have always spoken about the fact that this country is for us all. Zimbabwe is not for politicians. Zimbabwe is for all Zimbabwean people without looking at tribe, race, or whatever. And so the ground is being leveled to make sure that everyone brings on board what they think can make a better Zimbabwe, what can make a Zimbabwe we all want. And so to this end, Zimbabwe declared journalists, as I said, and I repeat because they did a magnificent work in terms of conscientizing our people about the preventative and precautionary measures during COVID-19. This is why Zimbabwe is actually in the top rank in terms of countries which have managed to contain this COVID-19 pandemic. They went around giving information about social distancing, giving information about masking up, giving information about where to go when you have got certain symptoms, what to do, and together we worked with them when we established a call center, when we realized that it is important in our country to have a two-way communication system where our people can actually ask questions as to how to react with this thing which we had not had in our lives. Our journalists got inoculated, and that went a long way. Some of them were inoculated publicly so that to show those who had fears about these vaccines. So we are very grateful, and this is why we want to work with our journalists. That time when there was that polarization, when government would keep information to themselves, when government didn't give information readily and timely to the people, is long gone. With the Second Republic, we introduced the post-cabinet briefings because cabinet belongs to the people, and it is only the people who need to be updated, cabinet needs to be accountable to the people. We report to you every Tuesday in this country, right after cabinet, timely, that what cabinet would have discussed about. And our journalists, without separating them, we have had every journalist invited to those Tuesday cabinet post briefings, whether you are online content journalist, we invite everyone. Foreign journalists, everyone is invited to that post cabinet briefing. The Second Republic strives to protect the rights of journalists at all times and strongly denounces acts of violence perpetrated on members of the media. We advocate for the long arm of the law to deal with perpetrators of violence. Zimbabwe is renowned for its peace, harmony, and stability. I categorically say impunity for crimes against journalists is unacceptable as it seeks to silence voices that keep our society in check. In 2013, you have been told I was the co-vice chair of a people-driven constitution making, where we went out on outreach, talking to the people of this country, what they wanted in their supreme law, our constitution. In 2013, that constitution was endorsed, and we do have a document which we are proudly owners of as Zimbabweans. The traditional leaders spoke, the women spoke, the children spoke, and we as a government are going through making sure that there is alignment of all our acts to that constitution. In all the media reforms which we have undertaken as a Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services, we have made it a point that we consult our stakeholders, We've held a number of seminars, a number of workshops, just to make sure that we bring everybody on board. We listen to you, because in listening, it makes us cleverer. And this has been going and it is ongoing. I categorically say, and I say this again, impunity for crimes against journalists is unacceptable. This year's commemorations were deliberately delayed in order to incorporate and put in context the recommendations from the high-level multi-stakeholder conference on the safety of journalists held on the 2nd November 2022 in Vienna, Austria. And these recommendations, as I was listening to Lydia speaking, I think will go a very long way. We never say we've done enough, but we will continue to work with you so that we achieve more. It is important that we are working as a continent. Nobody can do things for us without us. And it is important that we realize that as a continent, we need that multi-stakeholder multi-consultation. We need to jointly research together, engage our public, and of course, to make sure that even the judiciary, when it comes to the 4 pillars, which are very critical, which we heard about. And again, somebody said the exam will come, and believe you me, I don't want to fail that exam. I was here, I am a good listener. I spent all my life going to school. I never stopped learning. I learn from each and every one. And I think with that kind of attitude, I am bound to move together with everybody. So these 4 pillars which you spoke about will take us a long way: prevention, protection, prosecution, and partnership. That certainly will take us far. We need to make use of African media lawyers so that at least they speak from a position of knowledge. We want to come up with recommendations. These recommendations you came up with shows that Africans themselves were involved. There was a lot of debate. So I can't thank you enough for the work you are doing as UNESCO, bringing all the multi-stakeholders together, bringing all Africans, whether it's Eastern Africa, Western Africa, Southern Africa, Central Africa, because we are one continent. We love each other. We see a lot of work which is being done by our state leaders, and there's no reason why we can't get where we want to go. So the issue of strategic engagement is very, very important, pushing for independence and prosecution of crimes against journalism. And something which you spoke at length is about academic research, which is critical. And I'm glad I see, of course, Professor Magosongwe, who is now our chairperson for the Zimbabwe Media Commission. She has been with the University of Zimbabwe for a very long time, and the issue cannot be overemphasized. The fact that we need to come up with research and understand better where we want to go. And I always say, it's true. At the end, she said, if you want to go far, go alone. But if you go alone, what happens? You leave everybody behind. The mantra of our president in this country is to say, we should not leave anyone behind, neither leave any place behind, because if you do that, then you would not have achieved much. In fact, you would not have achieved anything. So it's better to move with everybody so that everyone understands. And truly so, no single actor, no matter how much you know, can achieve. We need to move together. The fact that the time has gone where we used to say, this is government and this is us on this side. and then you sit and you groan and you mourn. The fact that I'm the Minister of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services and that there's the Permanent Secretary and other officers, it doesn't mean that we are the best gurus in media. The gurus of media, you are in there. And so if you sit there and don't come on board, our doors are open. In fact, I said I removed the door. Sometimes it's easy for others to think, let's keep it the way it has been. The perceptions which have been built about this country, let's keep them. Some benefit from it maybe. But that's not the truth about this country. That's not the truth about the government of today. The Second Republic is saying, let's move all together. We want to be a friend of all and an enemy to none. We respect other people. We have a lot to learn from other people. So I just want to say, all of you, welcome to the Second Republic of Zimbabwe, which appreciates and really wants to work with you as we remove completely this evil. I am going to go back to my report, my paper. You know, I had already digressed because I am passionate about this, very, very passionate. This is, as we commemorate this year's International Day, to end impunity of crimes against journalists, it is imperative to highlight some major milestones achieved by the government, enabling a conducive environment for the media. Government repealed the Access to Information and Protection of Privacy Act, IPA, which had been a bone of contention between government and the media. IPA was replaced by the Freedom of Information Act. Government of Zimbabwe also enacted the Zimbabwe Media Commission, ZMC Act. We are also in the process of amending the Broadcasting Services Act, and this is being done in order to attract investment into the sector. Government, in consultation with stakeholders, is also drafting the Media Practitioners Bill, which will embrace issues of core regulation and help professionalize the media industry. This will raise standards in the profession, which will also bring public respect to the practitioners. I remember when we were having tea, I met our partners and we spoke about the importance of training. That is critical. We need to work together, train our journalists so that we eliminate the issue of vulnerable journalists, some who are given brown envelopes just for the sake of writing something to destroy another person or to destroy a community or a country. When we speak like this, it doesn't necessarily mean that we are not open for criticism. We want to be criticized, but we want criticism which is constructive. We don't claim that we know it all. Neither are we claiming that we are doing everything right, but we're saying, come on board, let's have constructive criticism. Let's sit together and see how best we can build a country with the best human rights. As a ministry, we have also adopted an open door policy that allows journalists to call in any time and access information regardless of who the rightful or what they wrote about us in today's morning paper. I've been seen as a Minister of Information. I think I'm the first Minister of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services who you have seen visiting private media. I've gone there to meet the management, to meet the workers, to talk about, to celebrate together, being the guest of honor for their functions, because I believe this is the media of my country. And again, like I say, whatever we write about our country, whatever we talk about our country, let everybody know that in one way or the other, if it's not factual, it will affect you. I always refer to the fact that when you travel around, I had an opportunity to live in many countries. We're the pioneer diplomats of this country In 1980, when Zimbabwe became independent, we were posted to Brussels. I lived in Brussels, and there we were actually in the center of Europe. I visited all European countries. In 85, went to New York. I had an opportunity to deal with everyone there at the United Nations. And I eventually ended up in China. So work in progress. And the truth of the matter is, we are all human beings. We may be different on our looks, but human beings are human beings. If you live with so many of them, you begin to understand that there is no one who is superior than the other. We may think differently, we may do things differently. Sometimes it's a matter of giving yourself time to understand why somebody is thinking like that, why somebody looks at you and says, this woman, what can she do? I do understand when that happens because of the road I've walked in my life. So we come back to this issue, which we need to deal with together. Whilst we mourn the death of about 300 journalists since the advent of the Second Republic, we are relieved and proud that none of such a death was in Zimbabwe. That record testifies to our government's awareness and attitude to the need to inculcate a culture that embraces freedom of the media and abhors impunity. Our mandate is to protect freedom of expression, the safety of journalists, media workers, and promote media development to advance the knowledge and understanding of our people and communities. And so normally people say politicians don't end, but I'm ending. And so in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a fruitful engagement as we deliberate to end impunity for crimes against journalists. I thank you sincerely. I thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. I can't rephrase or take anything from what you said because I'll be doing a disservice to it. Thank you very much. I want to say one thing though. When we were planning this day, we visited the Ministry of Information offices and we met Sylvia. And we said we are planning this on these days, and Sylvia said the minister won't be around. And I said, Sylvia, make it happen. Says the minister has to go to Dubai or something like that. And we said the minister has to be there. So we're very grateful, Minister, that you made time. I hope, I can't say I hope you missed your trip, but we are glad you are here with us. Yes.
Just to say, when I mentioned, I think I was asking my permanent secretary, when I mentioned the partners who have made it successful, for us to be able to issue out and operationalize the community radio stations and even the campus radios, in that process I mentioned UNESCO and many others, but I forgot a very critical and very important partner. That's Zachras. Remember, I was a deputy minister to Jonathan Moyo in the First Republic. And it was like a no-go area to talk to Zachras. But when we opened out the doors, Zachras has been working with us. We found each other. They have come up with equipment for the studios through our ministry. We issued out community radio stations which were accused for being anti-government and what, but Zachras came on board. Who is here from Zachras? Just to thank you. And as we walk together, Sandra. Thank you. I really thought that they are our partners. And with you, we are going to be able to launch all of them, the 14 of them. I'm sure before the end of the year, we'll be able to launch 3 more. And as we go into the new year, we'll launch the rest. Thank you very much.